everyone, and welcome to episode 476 of Constructive Criticism. I'm your host, Heezy, and I'm not joined by Mason because he's on a plane. I'm not joined by Abe because he's celebrating a Jewish holiday that I'm definitely going to pronounce wrong. Yom Kippur. There we go. Mm-hmm. I am joined by the co-host of the Need to Nerd podcast, the fantasy football commissioner of the Heezy Game Media fantasy football. It's Paddy the Baddie MTG. What's up, Paddy B?
Hey Spencer, how is it going today?
It's good. It's nice to be this feels good. I was thinking of guests for this week, and I was like, I should really get the Travis Kelce to my Taylor Swift for this episode.
Stop it.
We are going to be talking about Standard, about Worlds, and kind of reacting to what was a great tournament and what is a really interesting, fun, and open format, in my opinion. Before we do that, though, the point of the show is always improving. Always improving is the point of the show. And I'm going to go first this week. So, I've been spending some time looking at different combo decks with Matt Kling, former host of the show, and specifically just kind of thinking about Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and we'll kind of actually talk about that card a little bit today, because I think there's some interesting stuff happening in Standard with it. But I'm not the type of person that looks at combo decks pretty often. If people know me, they know I'm like a combo control guy, where it's like control the game, win the game with like Escape Shift or Splinter Twin, or that's the type of deck that I really really like. Creativity. I think that the value engines and the things that we talked about last week on the show with Mason around Agatha's Soul Cauldron has me interested that we have only scratched the surface of this card. It was really funny. I sent a message to my group chat today with some of my friends, and I was like, "Oh, look, it's Pod at Home, playing Prime Speaker, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and basically a pod shell, like a Kiki Jiki pod shell." And while funny, we had this big debate on Twitter, and Mason kind of drove a lot of it with his video about which cards would be okay to unban in modern Twitch stream. And I was like, I think pod is fine. I think you can unban pod, and I think that Agatha's Soul Cauldron market is better than pod. I think it's just a better, ubiquitous, stronger card than Brooklyn Pod. So it's kind of what I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially in the context of Modern, which is the RCQ season. Patty, you don't have to worry about that. I'm pretty sure you already won one.
No, I did not.
Oh, that was
one.
last season.
Nick,
was last season.
Yeah, last season. Nick won one last weekend. I top forward.
But yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking about you. Along with watching Worlds, obviously. What about you, Patty?
Yeah, so this week, my always improving moment. Last week was digging into Modern in preparation for that RCQ, and this week I think it's put in the prep once you asked me to come on the show, right, to dive back into Standard, because most of my time has been dedicated, since I am qualified for Atlanta. I'll be going down there with Wheaton and Lassen. I've been really diving into Pioneer and trying to work on that for this December. But the prep that I put in for Standard, hopping back on Arena, it was a good time to play a less powerful format, and I didn't really know where to start. So I actually started with the green-black deck that you had posted, right? And then your version of it, and was doing really well. I got to see in my first 3 matches the diversity that you were talking about. So it was good to switch formats and get a refresher that way this week.
I have 2 questions. One, well, first of all, I must say thank you for trusting me. I feel like when it comes to green mid-range decks in Standard, I'm a pretty good follow. How did it treat you?
It treated me pretty well. I think I went 3-2 with my first few matches.
Thanks.
There was some things that I didn't quite, reading the cards and touching them, right? Like learning that the Mosswood side is not an instant speed for the adventure part.
Sure, because the other one
right,
is. There's another green one in Standard that is instant for the green-red one, so that's interesting.
Yeah, so just seeing those little differences and picking up on them, getting those reps in is good practice for any new format.
And then my second question is, just because you're a podcast listener, you have been for a long time, when you listen to the show, do you do this segment in your head?
Yes, yeah, I do.
What is what I just because like I have to do it every week. I'm kind of curious. Like, do you like pause the show? Is it something you're actively thinking about when you're listening to the show? Like as we're talking about, like what was mine? What did I do? And like keeping yourself joking. Like, how does that work for you as a listener? Because you've
Um,
made like monumental strides in magic behind the scenes. Like if you listen to our podcast that we do together, I was complimenting Patty not that long ago that like Teddy had won an RC. He was like, I really want to prove that I'm like worth testing with you, Spencer, and the guys. And I was like, Patty, I wouldn't have asked you if I didn't think that about you. But like you've really stepped up your game. I'm kind of curious, like, is this segment and some the thing that this thing that we instill, like how do you use it?
yeah, so it generally happens after the episode because I like to listen to what you guys are saying and then the episode topic, right? So I think after the episode is over, I take 5 minutes to think about my always improving. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much for the praise.
Oh,
I've
you
been working
took
on
a
it a little bit.
compliment. Look, always improving in more ways, Patty B. Patreon, if you want to become a patron of the show will always be free. We want to give a shout out to our new patrons every week. This week, Michael became a patron. Thank you so much, Michael. I have a job, and for those who don't know, like the show goes to pay for like hosting and like a lot of different stuff. But I plan on getting the tokens created. I've been waiting to send out the wristbands until I got the tokens created. I know you've got some. Everybody has some. So like if you come up to an event, you see me or Mason or Abe, you can ask for one. Mason, Abe, and I usually will have them on us, just in our bags. But we do want to send them out to the patrons. I have a box full of all the patrons from the last like X amount of time with their addresses on it. It just was expensive shipping for what I was doing. So, but once we get the tokens printed and sent to my house, we will do another batch and send them out. So, just wanted to let people know. Housekeeping. Just want to give a shout out to our sponsor at Pure MTGO. We are looking for other sponsors, and if you are an MTGO player, there are lots of ways to sell your cards. One of the great ways is to go to our sponsor at mtgotraders.com. They buy Magic cards. I just sold a bunch of Moto stuff myself to them. It was super easy. Great way to do that. And then finally, before we get into our main topic, we are doing that bonus content. I already am planning to record with Kyle Falbo, MTG finance guy, original CCMTG member this week. So we got all of the coasts that we can lined up. It's gonna be a fun 10-year celebration for CC. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's dive in. Some Magic, Standard, and Worlds. Going to this event, Patty B.
Yes.
This is just off the top of my head, and some of it's like a little weird. So I'll just monologue for a second. We had events won by Mono Red, Golgari Mid, Esper Mid, Esper Legends. What's missing from this list, Spencer, is Esper Control. Blue Black Mid was like the dominant deck before the new set came out. But that's kind of what it looked like. It was like the different degrees of Esper, a Golgari mid-range deck, a Domain Ramp deck, and Mono Red. Not really something like very different. Like the decks that were kind of left over. You have the Rakdos Reanimator deck. I believe that deck won the standard U.S. RC, the last standard RC in the U.S. The one that Abe and I went to. You've got the Azuria Soldiers deck. You've got the Rakdos Reanimator deck, and Mono White Humans kind of ran out like the different decks, and then 26 decks make up the other category, which is more than the 20% the Esper midrange made up. Patty B, what did you know about Standard before I asked you to jump on the show?
Yeah. So back at the RC in San Diego, Esper was kind of the
Esper
defined
Legends.
the legend specifically was the defined deck after the ban Invoke Despair, Fable, and Bankbuster. That shift changed, and it felt like Control was the major player for a time there, and then we started getting some challenge results, and it seemed to be that blue black mid range and different variations and spices of that deck were the best thing. And for a while there, it did kind of feel like in those challenges, it was like whatever won the challenge dominated the metagames for the next week. And blue black mid range has kind of been the best thing for a while. But with the release of Woe, there are a lot of new cards that have opened things up. Rafine is still powerful, right? And I think we saw that with 29 decks playing Rafine, whether it was mid range or Legends. But the other colors got a lot of tools as well.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we saw for a while was this dominance of black decks, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Kind of going into Worlds, Liliana decks were the best decks, whether that was except for Esper Control, which tried to beat the Liliana decks in a different way. So what did we see from Worlds? I kind of looked at the data. I didn't do a power rankings, but like the winning decks. I mean, obviously Esper Legends won the event, so just kind of like a shout out here to Mr. DePraz. Also, just like kind of putting together a really good Magic career, a little bit under the radar. I feel like.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Just really cool to see. Become a world champion is just like a thing that everybody wants to do, right? So really cool to see. But one of the things, kind of the narrative going into this event, like, was that the reason the Golgari mid-range picked up in popularity was it was good against the Esper decks, and what we end up seeing is there are different flavors of decks, but the as far as like the top performing deck, the highest ranking Esper mid-range ended up going 7-1 and 6-1. I don't know how these scores were taken into, but also 6-2, 6-2, and then another Esper Legends at 6-2. So almost all of the top performing decks were still Esper. And if we look at the top 8, there were also an Esper Legends and an Esper mid-range deck kind of doing their thing, man.
Yeah, I think there was 3, right? There was 2 Esper mid-range for Lorenzo and Kazune. They both played the mid-range version. And then you had our champion, Jean Emmanuel, playing the Legends version.
Oh, you're right. I did miss the 8th place list there.
Yeah, Esper's still doing well. Rafine is still great.
It's something that's gotten to play the format and watch a lot of Worlds. I think you and I both watched a ton of Worlds. Where do you sit kind of on what these Esper decks are doing well, which version of Esper you like, what are Esper's weakness? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. So we see with these Esper decks, the threat quality is really high and relatively cheap in mana cost, right? Rafine being this attacker that filters your draws and can just add up the protection on it with the ward 1. All the threats out of Esper are just really high value. You get to protect them with things like Skrelv. I personally, I played a few different spices of the deck on Sunday, just as I was watching the top 8, and I kind of like it's super interesting. You have some higher power level draws, I think, with the mid range version of the deck, where creating the 2/2 light vigilance knight with the virtue of loyalty, and just seeing how the enchantments like Virtue of Loyalty and when the wedding announcement can take over the game. I kind of like that aspect, but the threats out of Legends are just so efficient. It's hard to pass up there. I also kind of like where Greg Orange's deck was, with still seeing control represented is great. It kind of felt awkward whenever if you don't have Beanstalk going, your draws can look really shallow and not great.
Yeah, the Greg Orange deck is interesting, and we'll get to that. I want to stay on Esper for a second. Narrative going into the weekend was that Golgari is good against Esper, and one of the things that the Esper deck does, the Legends deck does really well, is it buries your opponent, but it also is awkward. And when you run hot, the deck, I mean, you experienced this literally at the RC. When you run
Yep.
hot, you're like, nah, nothing's beating this. And then when you don't run hot, you're like, I'm in a little bit of trouble. Like this is actually a little awkward. If my opponent has the right removal spells at the right time, it's even more awkward. And the thing is that because Mono Red is in the format, Cut Down is actually a lot better than it has been previously, and that card is actually quite good against Esper Legends. And I think that the Glory deck had to get a little unlucky, and not taking anything away from our champion because they played excellently. I was talking to Matt about the deck, like definitely really strong. But I was interested. I was interested in kind of how these played out, how we ended up in a world where people both landed on Esper and expected Esper, to the point where Golgari got so much of the representation. I mean, obviously, I've never been close to qualifying for a world championship, but that is what I would have played at the world championship. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the black removal seems really good. Yeah, and having the cut downs, being able to kill most of the deck. I think everything except for Lord Skitter and Shieldred cut down can take down for 1 mana. So that efficient removal spell, and the Esper decks being able to board into that as well, right? Having access to that kind of removal makes the mirror super interesting. I was on Esper Legends for San Diego's RC, and yeah, that was what I found was the removal spells have to line up right,
Yeah,
or it gets awkward.
I think that's true, and also just kind of like looking at the decks a little bit, like there are certain things that Esper midrange does that is just super similar, right? Like what is the line you draw, other than like your mana base, right? Like there's still a Plaza of Heroes, there's still some of all of the things, and I think it comes down to like being more reactive in the non-legends build. But there's still all of their creatures, still legends in the Esper mid-range builds for the most part. Just kind of depends. One thing that I wanted to say on this topic, and I think it's what I said when the bans happened, is that I fully expected wedding announcement decks to become dominant in some way. Like we were the rules of engagement really cared about like 3 mana enchantments in the form of Fable of the Mirrorbreaker and Wedding Announcement. And it did not change in a lot of ways. You still cared about Wedding Announcements. Both our first and second place deck had Wedding Announcement. There were Wedding Announcements across mono white aggressive decks, white decks. We talked about how Liliana was dominating. A great way to beat Liliana is just to play a Wedding Announcement.
Yeah, that was the one thing I found with playing Liliana decks is what's great about Sanders. You can kind of play whatever you want right now, and there's if you like combo, if you like control, mid range aggro, there's a deck for you. And even in some of those matchups where there are things that you want to be able to kill with Liliana, random tokens are making it a bit more difficult to get the right off the board that you want.
I need to make a caveat though. The Wedding Announcements were in the sideboard of the Depraz deck, and
Yes,
but there it was still 4-4, and the
yeah.
Azori Soldiers deck also played 4. Like they were just
The
all
Soldiers deck and both mid range decks had them in the main.
Yeah. What do you think, Paddy B? What do you think of like the matchup of this, like the triangle that people believe exists, right? You have the Esper decks losing to the Golgari decks losing to the
Red decks.
the ramp decks, the ramp decks losing to the Esper decks. Because what happened on camera was not that, right? You had Duresses and Liliana beating the ramp deck. You had Esper beating the Golgari deck. It was just a complete mess.
Yeah, and I think to that your normal heuristics as far as matchups and archetypes. I think a bit of that changes at the higher levels, and especially at a, a tournament like the World Championships, where like every player is tier, and so the lists were super tuned right for this smaller tournament. I think that may have had something to do with the triangle being messier and everything being closer than it would seem on aggregate.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I played all of these decks, and I think that the fact that there are so many different decks in standard goes to show that there's a lot to tune for. So, one of the things that we haven't mentioned is Control did not do well outside of Red Orange. It did pretty poorly, and a huge reason for that these Esper Control decks didn't do as well is like there was a lot to prepare for, and we haven't even gotten into some of the surprises that came out of this format. So let's talk about one of the surprises and something that we haven't talked about yet. Did you get a chance to watch any of the Cauldron decks?
I didn't get to watch any of the Cauldron decks, but I've played against a couple on Arena, and what they're doing, it seems very busted, like when it works.
Yeah. So just to kind of let the listener know what's happening here is there were 3 total Cauldron decks at Worlds. All 3 of them had winning records in Standard. And the way that this works is they play. It was either Mono Blue or Simic, and they have Sleep Cursed Fairy, Rona, and like kind of this way to. Oh, I zoomed in way too much.
There's a couple options. I think it's like Omen Hawker or
Yeah.
Kami.
Yep, Omen Hawker was one of the ones. Basically, they have a way to, and then they also play for what it's worth training grounds,
Yep.
which is what
Yep.
our main topic when we do our level up
Remember
episodes
training
is
grounds.
named after. So training grounds make things cost 2 less to activate. Then you have something like the ability of Omen Hawker in play, which taps to make 2 mana to activate abilities. You can untap the Sleep Curse Fairy for that. Then you can make infinite activated abilities. That's how that works.
Yeah, I think you also you get with that it grows each turn, right? Like you keep at. I think you can untap.
That's it. That's infinite mana. Once you have
Right.
infinite mana, you can connive infinite times with Hypnotic Grifter. Once you've done that, you can, draw your deck, make your creature as big as you want.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, yeah. And then
That's just
basically,
one of the combos for what it's worth. But
yeah.
yeah, this can all happen on one creature because of, I guess, the Soul Cauldron. This deck, plays. We also now have multiple 1 mana cantrips in Standard in the form of Consider and Sleight of Hand, both Pioneer playable. This isn't the end of these blue decks. Honestly, I'm a little surprised we didn't see like Surge Engine, Consider, Sleight of Hand, Mono Blue, like tempo decks in this format. The power of just unsummoning something in these mid range decks was so good and completely crushes things like the ramp deck. So I just wanted to call out that like while we were talking about these decks, there were new things to come out of the standard format.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense with the you've been a big mono blue opponent for a long time in a bunch of the different formats, whether it's standard pioneer. But yeah, I'm surprised we didn't see much mono blue.
I'm not surprised we didn't see like actual mono blue. I was just more making a comment that like there is we've entered like a new type of format with like the fact that there are 8 cantrips that are reasonable and it's not the
Mm-hmm.
best deck says that we're in a whole new world of standard.
Right? Because those can't like things like that would have been unheard
Historically,
of
yeah,
back in the day.
historically it would have been really powerful. Uh,
Gotcha. Okay.
so what should people expect moving forward, do you think, Paddy B?
Yeah. So if you're playing, ranked or leagues, you can expect to see a lot of Esper Legends and Ramp. I've seen a lot of that in the queues. You got to be able to answer the creatures early. It makes sense that it was a hard place for control with all the different threats out of all these different decks.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about when looking at a format like this is, it becomes about like sizing. So, okay, Esper is really good. What are the cards that beat Esper? Are there things that I can do to get under or around it or over it? And I kind of look at like Jabberwocky took had a top 16 at 7-1 in this super qualifier this weekend for standard, with a crazy version of the kind of the 4-color ramp decks. Lots of things like Virtue of Persistence, which I think was a house this weekend. Every time it was cast, it looked really good. One of the cards in our Pick 2 set reviews. So like that's a way to go really big. But there are other ways. Like you just have to figure out like what is the format about this week, and with the format of this open, that's what it is. It's okay. What is it about this week? Is it a Liliana week? Is it a Rafine week? Is it a Mono Red week? And things like that. And I also think there's room to innovate. I think we already mentioned Mono Blue Tempo as like there's a lot of cantrips now. Is there a way to make something like Fading Hope good again, especially if people are just on Atraxa or stuff like that? Counter spells are naturally good against the ramp deck, things like that.
I think it's good to say as well that standard should, while we're trying to win and be competitive as well, there's a lot of stuff that is viable and competitive, so you can play what you want, right? If you love ramp, you can play the ramp decks. Mid-range decks are everywhere. A little harder to play control, but I think if you have the right set of answers that you want to answer, that can be a good option. And that standard's fun, and you can have fun with that.
The Greg Orange deck showed kind of this different take on control, right? Because it wasn't doing the Esper thing. It was like, no, I'm going to be a Leyline Binding up the Beanstalk control deck because they're the best things for control in standard, and then I'll naturally get there. Sunfall automatically draws me cards, and then I can play things like Syncopate, March of some of those X spells to round out
to get that trigger.
Yeah, to get those extra things. So, with that being said, I think we're saying look at the week, look at the format, and make decisions from there. And it becomes about sizing and leveling. This format's different, and it's a really fun standard format. If you didn't get to watch the World Championship, take a look. Like there are tools that every deck's gonna have to help them in their quest to be the best, to beat up on these things. Take a look. What would you play, Paddy B? You got a standard tournament tomorrow. Aliens are invading. You have to win against the aliens to save the Earth. What do you play?
I'm sticking with. This is what I said when I went to San Diego. I told you it was like I'm dancing with the date that brought me. Right. I won my RCQ with Esper Legends. Played in San Diego with Legends. Legends has been my little baby. I don't think that would change. I have the most reps with that, and I love the addition of Lord Skitter. A couple of those, because in that 3-drop slot, I liked Graveyard Trespasser, right? And I tried mid-range decks that were able to take advantage of the graveyard, and having a legend that does that is sweet.
Yeah, I love that pick. I think obviously you can't go wrong with almost any of the top decks. I think that I would be on ramp, not just because like I'm Spencer and I love ramp, but I think that just kind of watching the ability to play things like I think Reed Duke had a couple of turns. He had to get pretty unlucky to lose against Anthony. I was watching with Matt Kling, and just playing things like Obstinate Bailoff out of the board and like really shutting the door while also getting to be really good against like mono red and things like that. These things that are supposed to naturally prey upon you was really interesting. So that is going to do it. No Patreon question this week, just because I don't know. It felt like weird to do a Patreon question with a guest, but we do have a question, a comment from Young Tiger on YouTube. This Soul Cauldron will be one of the biggest FOMO regrets. I bought so many awful cards from the set, and then sifted through Cauldron 10 times. Wish I snagged 3. Paddy B, how many Soul Cauldrons did you buy?
So I'm sponsored by Kayfabe Cards, and so I don't purchase cards anymore. and until that changes. Um,
But how many did you save for the store?
we saved 2 for the store, I
Oh,
think.
that's not enough. You needed way more than that.
Maybe. With it being modern season, I don't think we have much, if at all, like, stuff for Yogg. So, it wasn't, like,
Let me tell you.
high on the
Let me tell
priority
you. The
list.
Yogg is only the beginning of Soul Cauldron decks in Modern.
Yeah, I found now, speaking of the different cards, awful cards for Cauldron, right? I picked up a few, or rather pulled a few things as I was tabling for our TCG guy. It's like, is this worth anything now? Like, oh, how about this one? Like, I got to look at a bunch of things with activated abilities, and it was always in my head now, right? Like, oh, is that how does that work with Cauldron?
How does that work
Right?
with Cauldron? If
I do
you
not envy the judges who have
if
to deal
you
with
want to join the
those.
conversation, talk about all how great Cauldron is, you can go to the Patreon Discord, become a patron of $5 or more, or join the public Discord. You can see me posting videos of being Kylo Ren and shooting my wife with lasers in fantasy football until she is obliterated. You can also join through the YouTube comments. We read one this week. We try to read them whenever there is one that makes sense for the show. And then follow the show on Twitter at CCMPG. You can also check out Drafting Archetypes. You can subscribe, review, and comment. That's the best way to support the show for free. It really does help out wherever you are interacting with the show. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really does help out. Paddy B, if people want to find you, where can they do that?
Yeah, so they can find me on Twitter at Paddy B MTG, and also on YouTube with the lovely Spencer Howland on the Need to Nerd podcast. We've got a contest going right now. Not a contest. What do you call it? To get more
A,
subs.
a giveaway?
Giveaway. That's the word. A giveaway. So check out that channel. We've got a lot of awesome stuff. We just reviewed the 4th book in the Inheritance cycle. So yeah, check us out there.
Yeah, you can find me at Spencer13H on X. You can find me there as well on Blue Sky, which hopefully takes off. And then I'm on, it's Spencer13H everywhere. And then you can find me on the Neat General podcast and Smash Through, 2 podcasts that I do with Paddy B and Matt Kling. Mike Evans did Mike Evans stuff, Paddy B, and I'm gonna win.
That's exciting. Good for you.
What did you learn on the show this week?
So I learned that standard is diverse, right? Whether it was preparing for the show this week and talking it out with you, there are so many things to play. I don't know if we didn't really talk about the places where people can play now. We listed a few things like the open and standard showdowns coming back, so they're really pushing standard, and I think that will be good. I'm excited for standard.
Yeah, I learned that I might be a mono blue gamer again for a little bit online, because like I had not thought about this many cantrips, but the fact that I don't have to play like Anticipate anymore is kind of busted with Hygiene.
You'd still
So
probably play Impulse though, right?
I don't know. I gotta get pen to paper, buddy.
Yeah,
Gotta
we'll
get
work
pen
on
to,
it.
gotta get it good. Gotta get it good. I might be a Delver gamer for a hot minute. Thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you all next time with another episode of CCMTG.